Welcome to Mothering from Within, the podcast where we dive into the heart of parenting during those magical yet challenging first few years. I'm Kaili Ets, a mama of two, a pediatric occupational therapist, and your guide on this beautiful journey of motherhood. Every week, we explore the wonders and hurdles of motherhood with curiosity, we gain clarity around our babies, and find the courage to trust our instincts. If you are a mama who wants to do motherhood your way, confidently, courageously, authentically, then you are in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, tuck those little ones in for a nap, or bring them along for the ride. It's time to get curious, gain clarity, and unleash your courage to do motherhood your way. A gentle disclaimer. Please do not consider anything discussed on this podcast by myself or any guest of the podcast to be medical advice. The information is provided for educational purposes only and does not take the place of your own medical or healthcare provider. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today, Rachel. And today we're going to really dive into talking about moms and our identity as moms, but also our identity that we often lose in motherhood and how we can sort of start to reclaim that identity or become more aware of all those other pieces that make up ourselves. And also, we may end up diving into some relationship talk, which is super exciting as well. So, welcome, Rachel. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are, how you came into this world of, really focusing on moms in the perinatal stage?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited, as I said, to reconnect and to talk about this kind of shared passion from a different angle. So, yeah, I am Rachel Morrison. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm also a psychotherapist, and I work with moms at all ages and stages, although the bulk of my work in private practice is in that perinatal period. So, pregnancy through, I would say, I'm going to stretch the textbook definition a bit. The first few years of motherhood is a lot of the perinatal stuff. My passion really is helping moms to feel supported, helping them feel confident in the motherhood journey, as much as a cliche as that is. It really is what it is. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And through every age and stage, there's different challenges and rewards. And it's so fun to navigate that with my clients.
Yeah, so amazing. And I love this idea of confidence because I think that when we get lost in just being a mom and what we see on social media and what our
Mhm.
doctors are telling us, and we have all of these questions and concerns and like, am I doing this right? And it's a big learning curve. And I think that we lose that confidence in ourselves. And I think that is such an important thing to come back to, and it is a journey because it will always change.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
is the one constant in life is that it will always change. Your babies will grow up,
Yes.
they will become older. Eventually, my kids are now 6 and 8, but eventually we're gonna enter that whole teenage years, which I'm not even ready for. So it's just this
Same.
kind of constant journey, right? Ebbs and
Yeah.
flows, always learning new
Yeah.
things. And then just when you feel like you have learned it, it changes.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so this is where that confidence in yourself and in that trust in your instincts and that trust in
Mhm.
your knowing and that you know what is right for your family, whatever the situation,
Mhm.
that's the piece I think that's so important. So let's
Yeah.
dive into how can we, as moms, I guess, start to reclaim some of that and start to pull ourselves out of this hole that's just motherhood and being a mom and being
Yeah.
overwhelmed with being a mom. How do we find that person we were or parts of that
Yeah.
person? Because we are changing. We are birthed. When we birth our babies, we are also birthed as a mom.
Yeah.
And that is also like we're in our infancy period as moms too.
Yes,
So I
totally.
think that's giving us ourselves grace as well. So yeah,
Mhm.
so talk to us a little bit about this whole identity piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things I would say there's the first one, and I think you and I have had this chat either, on social media or through commenting on others' posts about the concept of matrescence. So
Mhm.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that like we're in our infancy, or some people would say like we're in our adolescence of motherhood, right? So the term matrescence really, it's every single one of my clients I educate about it, and it's so validating because matrescence really encapsulates the developmental stage that is motherhood, right? If you're a birthing parent, there's raging hormones. Even if you're not, studies have shown that there are hormonal changes not as drastic to non-birthing parents as well. And there's sleep deprivation and there is changes to your body and there's changes to, so many aspects of your life. And so much of it sort of mimics other developmental stages through life. There are a lot of parallels. And I think just understanding and having a knowledge and an understanding of this concept can be so validating for a lot of moms who are struggling with
Mhm.
who they are and what is happening and why their life feels so upside down, right? So, if we think about adolescence, for example,
Mhm.
there's hormonal changes, there's changes to your body, some which are not welcome changes. There's changes to your brain and your thoughts and so many aspects of your life, and the main difference here, aside from the obvious, is society has a pretty good understanding and recognition of this life stage, right?
Mhm.
Whereas we are just starting to sort of, you know, do more research and really get under the covers of this stage that is matrescence. So moms are not given that same grace in a lot of ways. So that's always the very first thing, or one of the very first things that I talk about, just to normalize that feeling of overwhelm, that feeling of feeling lost and like, who am I? And then I would say, like, once we get into, the real therapeutic process, it can look different depending on the stage for sure, and just on where the person is at. I think during that first few months of motherhood, it's really about the validation in that piece. Like, it really is a getting through the day kind of a stage of life for a lot of moms, the moms who are coming to see me. And so it's normalizing, it's validating, it's, you know, looking for kind of glimmers and savoring the moments where you are feeling more connected to yourself and looking for new connections. But I'm really always very careful about not adding to that pressure because
Mhm.
that feels really big, right? And it's
Mhm.
such a tender and vulnerable stage of life. And there's so much going on with hormones, with sleep, with relationship shifts, which we'll get to, with, so many things that even when a mom presents and comes to me with, I feel like I've completely lost myself. It's like, I totally, totally get that. And I've been there and it's going to get better and we're going to get to that. And right now, let's get you sleeping and let's get some of your worries and your depressed thoughts and symptoms
Mhm.
managed under control and focus on self care and you and your baby. And the bigger pieces start to sort of shift and come a little bit later. Um,
Mhm.
that said, if a mom comes to me, and this happens a lot actually, and I think there is that sort of 1, 2 years of like fight or flight, get through infant stage, get through toddler stage even. And a lot of moms actually come to me with, I would say like maybe preschool age kids,
Mhm.
sometimes like kindergarten even or thereabouts. And it's like the fog has lifted.
Mhm. They can
And
breathe a little
life,
bit.
exactly. It's like they have a little, exactly. It's like it is still busy. It's still busy. I both have like
Mhm.
older kids and it's still, and that part doesn't change,
So
but it's like,
crazy.
Totally, totally. But it's like they have just that bit of, the fog has lifted and and they're like, and then one day they wake up in the morning and life is a bit more manageable, maybe, but it's like, oh my God, who am I? Like,
Mhm.
they don't even recognize themselves. And so when that's more of the focus of the work, one of the first things we do, still normalize and validate, because it's still
Mhm.
totally, totally normal. One of the first parts of the work that I like to do with clients is getting back in touch with values.
Mhm.
So, because here's the thing, like the person that we were has not gone anywhere, right? Like we're still the same person and we have now had a very life altering experience, but it doesn't change who we are. It's one step in our like growth as a human being throughout our lifetime, right?
Mhm.
And what generally tends to stay relatively static through lifespan is values. So life change, and they shift. Don't get me wrong. That's not 100% going to be the same. My values have changed. I'm sure your values have changed somewhat, especially with motherhood.
Yeah.
But there are, generally speaking, some core values that remain pretty constant throughout a person's life. And so it can be really, really grounding to get back in touch with those values. And then we practice, okay, so if the value is self-care, you know, self-care might look different now.
Yeah.
It might look different, but it still connects back to that same value. So it might have been an hour at the gym 5 days a week before having kids. And now it might look like, a 15-minute uninterrupted shower every day.
Yep.
Right. Right.
It's so true. And I tell moms that too. Even if it's like you get to drink your coffee while it's hot, that is self-care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Enjoying.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. And so, any number of things, right? Like if a strong value was like time with friends, and you're like, yeah, I have no social life. I don't know how to make friends as a mom, and again, it might look different now, but let's find creative ways to bring that value into what your life looks, bring that piece of you that is still there, that just looks different into your life.
Yeah.
Right?
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And I think this is so important. The big piece is the validation and the normalizing that everybody goes through this. It's not just you, right? And I think this is a big drawback of social media. As much as technology is amazing and wonderful, and yes, we're moving so much far forward with it, and we can connect with people all over the world and all of that, but it really is a big stressor, especially I find for those first few years of motherhood, because it leads to a lot of comparing. And as a result, you're feeling like you're failing and you're inadequate and you're somehow can't manage this motherhood thing and also have a quote unquote life. Um, and I think that puts a lot of stress, unnecessary stress, but it's stress nonetheless. And we're being bombarded with it. And I think that it has gotten to the point where on social media, everything looks perfect. And when you're not perfect, or your baby's not sleeping through the night, or your baby isn't doing XYZ, or, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I fit in this self-care? You feel like a failure. And so the normalizing and the validating is so important.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, you know what? You are taking care of a life. You are helping that baby survive. That is your primary job. And that's okay if all you did during the day is help your baby survive. And so it doesn't matter what your house looks like. It doesn't matter, if you got to go, out with friends, or you had like a ton of visitors, or whatever it is that you're feeling that mom guilt, because that is a huge piece to that mom guilt, right? So I think that's wonderful. Do you have any strategies or exercises that you do to help moms kind of tune back into what their values are, or, what their identities, or how to kind of come back to this identity of them as a person versus them just as a mom?
Yes. And if it's okay, before I tell you about that, I want to just touch a bit on the comparison point that you make. So I think that's super, super important. And especially in the world we live in right now with social media, I actually do, but you'd be surprised, or you probably wouldn't be surprised at how much for some people, like, social media is a discussion in my sessions. And here's the thing, because it really is, I have a love-hate relationship with social media, right? Like, it's like, you know, I connect with people like you through social media, and motherhood is such a lonely time, or can be such a very lonely and isolating time. My heart actually breaks for people who went through the new motherhood stage during the pandemic, like, just such a lonely, isolating time to begin with. And I think social media can, when used appropriately, fill some of that gap. I don't think it's ever going to fill some of the face-to-face, or it's just some of the, like, massive shifts that take place. But at a superficial level, it can forge connections. It can be a good source of information, right? Like, I will actually, prescribe, or like, recommend certain social media accounts that I think have a very refreshing view or take, or reinforce some of the messages. That said, when it comes to comparison, so the thing that a lot of people don't understand, so comparison has a very evolutionary purpose, right? We compare from an evolutionary perspective to better ourselves. Okay.
Mhm.
So what I like to work with clients on around comparison is like, okay, so there's some very, if something on social media is making you feel like garbage, just please unfollow. Like that's like the first step, right?
100%. Yep.
If there's accounts where you're like, okay, I just, I'm constantly comparing myself to this person in real life, or, like the mom at the drop off who is dressed to the nines and it looks like she has all of her stuff together and all the things. It's like, okay, let's look at that and let's tease out where the value is, right? Because comparison is not always a bad thing
Mm.
if it's kind of framed in a way of like holding up a mirror to yourself,
Mm.
right? We can never compare exact circumstances to the next, right? So that's the first thing. It's like, however put together a person looks, you have no idea what support they have, have no idea what, you know, challenges they have on the inside, you have no idea. But
Mm.
if there are things about a certain person that you find yourself constantly comparing up to, it's like frame that as like admiration, right?
Mhm.
It's like, okay, what do I admire in that person? And what are the ways that I exhibit that, right? Often it's like a sign of a quality that we have, getting back to the identity piece,
Mm.
that we're not living as truly as we would like,
I love
right?
this.
I feel like that was yeah, okay, good. Because I was like, I hope that makes sense because I was really passionate and
Yeah, yeah. No, I think this
right
is
there,
such
but
a nice
yeah.
reframe that I haven't considered before. So thank you for bringing that up. I like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
reframe of the comparison and sort of what values are you sort of initially a little bit jealous of almost, right? And where is
Mhm.
that coming from? And,
Mm.
how do you kind of get back to your own values and maybe you were like that and how do you get back to that, right? If that's something that you're missing in your
Yeah,
life, right? Where maybe before having kids you were the person that was put together and now you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't
right.
even have time for that. So
Yeah.
that's sort of one of those things of like, okay, well, how could I, because this would also come back to the taking care of yourself, right? How can I take
Mhm.
care of myself first so that I can feel a little bit more like that person
Yeah,
that I was, who was a little bit more put together? Does that mean that I,
yeah,
make a point to do a quick little skincare routine in the morning? Or do I put some
right.
mascara on before I leave the house, right? It doesn't have to be a big
Mm,
thing. And
mm,
that's such a superficial thing, but like it's an easy way to kind of visualize what that might look like. And I
yeah.
think that then brings into taking care of ourselves, this whole self-care piece, so that we can show up as the person that we want to be.
Yeah, and I think the key is I wanna be clear, this is a very, like, thin edge to walk because
Yeah.
I'm never going to encourage someone to compare on social media. It's like when they are like, let's look for why.
Almost like
Exactly.
when they're getting triggered. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, look for the whys. But what I was gonna say is I think what's key to this process is doing it with self-compassion for yourself, right? It's like
Yeah.
you never want it to be like, I'm not good enough or
Hmm.
I'm not as good as that person. It's like, okay, what am I admiring about this person? And how can I bring that into more of my life if that's a healthy way that we can look at it for some
I
people.
love that. If you are ready to take a courageous step towards doing motherhood your way, the Mothering from Within Collective is waiting with open arms to help you get curious about your parenting values, tune into your mama instincts, gain clarity about baby sleep, development, reflux, and more so that you can be the confident supermom you have always dreamed of. Visit the link in the show notes to learn more about the collective and how we can walk this beautiful path together.
I do want to get back to your values because I do have a couple fun ones that I use. It's funny. It's for something that is like a pretty, I don't say basic concept, but everyone knows the concept of values. It's really, or it was surprising to me early in my work. It's not surprising anymore because it's almost universal. People have a really hard time. They're often caught off guard and like, well, what are your
Yeah.
values? And they're often
Yeah.
like, I don't know. So yeah, and it's hard. We kind of lose touch with that core sense. So some of the fun ways I like to sort of get them talking about and thinking about, one is if you were to picture a documentary about your life,
Mhm.
what and then it depends on kind of what domain we're thinking about. but I usually do a few. So it's like, if you were to do a documentary about your life and someone's going to interview 3 people, let's talk about like a coworker first. What would they say about you? Okay. And then it's easier to think about like what someone else would say versus saying that about yourself almost. And often they'll start out by saying like, oh, they would say I was helpful or hardworking. Um, and it's like, okay, that starts to pull out the values, right? And then we go to shift to a different domain. It's like, okay, what would your partner say about you in this documentary, you know, 20 years down the line about how you lived your life? And that brings out a different way. Like, picture your child now as an adult. What would you want them to say about you as a parent? So that one's really neat. The other exercise that I often do is to think about the best time and the worst time in your life. This can be a bit more of a delicate, more painful one. And think about, in the best case time, what were the qualities about you or about the qualities about the situation that made that experience so memorable and meaningful. And you have to do a bit of additional digging sometimes with this one, because they might be like, oh, it was a beautiful beach and the weather was great, right? So it's like, okay, so the value there, and so it takes a bit of questioning, could be like valuing nature, right? Valuing like serenity, like, what is the value of the quality? And then when we talk about sort of the most challenging time, what were the values? What were the qualities within yourself that got you through that time?
Okay.
And that can bring out, okay, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, that was a horrible, horrible time. And I showed a lot of resilience. Like, I just kind of kept getting up every day. And often they won't use the word resilience. They'll say like, yeah, I guess, what got me through was just kind of getting up every morning and putting one foot in front of the other. Like, okay, resilience, right? Okay, what got me through was I actually am really thankful I had a really great support network. Okay, so gratitude and family and friends, right? It's like, it just gives them some content to get back to the values with.
Yeah. I will say that values is something that I struggle with also. Like, if you were to just be like, oh, what are your top 3 values? I would probably not be able to tell you. And as a business owner, it's something that comes up a lot as well. Like, what are your values in terms of your business, in terms of your life? Like, what do you want to embody, right? And so for me also, I love these. These are new. I haven't heard of these exercises. So this is great. I'm going to start thinking about that. But also, just a really quick way is to Google like a values list and go through and initially see which ones kind of pop out at you. And then you kind of narrow down, right? So I usually will print that out. I'll highlight the ones that I'm drawn to. And then I'll start to think about, why am I drawn to those? And is that something that I really do value? And I kind of try to narrow it down to 3. I don't know if you have like a number that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, I usually say 3 to 5. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, sometimes just keeping it simple is best. And again, it depends on like the person's, just communication style. There's also like values card sorting activities that's kind of along the same line. When I do take that approach, because I also take that approach with some people when they're just more of like a, kind of a concrete like, or visual, right? Seeing the list. What, you'll get to do exactly what you do. And then they have like 10, right? And I'm like, okay. And like you said, it's like, what's the meaning behind that? Also, one question that can help narrow it down a bit is, okay, so looking at this list, what are sort of like the nice to haves and what can you not picture your life without?
I love that.
Right? Yeah. And then they're like, oh, okay. So this one's kind of like, but really, like, these are my core values. Like, this is the way I want to live my life.
Yeah.
They really
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So good. Okay. So do we want to transition into this relationship talk? And I think we've talked a little bit about how our relationship with ourselves and our identity kind of changes with motherhood. But then there's the whole other sort of like partner relationship, family relationship. There's so many other relationships in our lives, friends relationships that also often change when we have a baby.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like we were chatting last night. It's like hard to separate the two, right? Because it's hard to maintain relationships as they once were when you don't even feel like you know yourself anymore, right? It's like, how is someone else supposed to know you the way they did and vice versa when it's just like everything is just so new and different. Yeah, yeah. And I think again, and this one gets a bit more complicated because even though it is universal, everyone comes in a different place, right? And for some, and I'm talking right now more, more about sort of like the couplehood and the sort of the co-parenting relationship, but it's like everyone comes in a different place in that relationship, right? So that has to be taken into consideration as well. But I think at that early stage, it's like, again, you have to factor in sleep deprivation, right? It's like one parent is always going to be pretty severely sleep deprived in those first few months. And in vast majority of cases, both parents to some degree are
Yeah.
going to be sleep deprived, right? And no one is at their best when they're
True.
when they're sleep deprived, right? So I think in those early weeks and months, a lot of it is compassion, right? Giving each other grace, giving each other, validation and space as best as you can, and just keeping the lines of communication open, knowing that things to some degree will settle down in a lot of cases. But then there is this bigger piece, right? And again, it depends on what patterns are sort of there in a relationship already. But there's this bigger piece of like, yeah, okay, here we were as, partners, and these are the dynamics. And now there's like this whole other person in the mix, right? This whole other set of responsibilities, this whole other set of routines or disruption of routines. And it's a lot to navigate, right? One thing I will say is, and again, this is a very fine line to walk because things are so new and overwhelming in those early days. Patterns can get very deeply entrenched if we're not aware of them those first few months and years. I guess that's the way I would say it. I think in Canada anyway, most of the time, and this is shifting a bit with longer paternity leaves, but most of the time the mother is off work for a year, sometimes even 8 months, 18 months. And in that time, we are taking on a lot of the caregiving role because we're not doing the work outside the house. Again, we can get into like how the whole like 24-hour job versus the 8 to 10 hour job. But then what I see happen often is like mom goes back to work and now has a full-time job and none of the home responsibilities shift.
Yep.
So that can be a big source of interpersonal conflict or interpersonal resentment, to be honest. I think what I also see a lot of though is this pattern of really holding tightly to control over a situation. And, we or whoever the primary caregiver is spending the majority of time with baby. They're getting into their own routines. And often it's like easier. Just like teaching a kid to tie a shoelace, right? It's like sometimes it's easier if we just do it ourselves, right? But they will never learn if we don't. So I see often this interpersonal pattern of primary caregiver feeling really burnt out and feeling resentful and feeling overwhelmed, and caregiver two is wanting to help, but they're not sure how, and they're feeling like they're getting it wrong, and they're feeling like they're not as good as primary caregiver. So all it is to say, open communication, trust, really trying to take a collaborative problem solving approach is what I always lead with, right? Because it can so easily get to comparison of who has more on their plate, a comparison of whose life is harder at that stage, and a comparison of who's doing what and tit for tat. And, I mean, again, at any stage of life,
I'm like, I don't think that can.
Right? So I mean, it's kind of like a universal thing to think about that's never going to be perfect. But it's good, again, and it's good to start practicing early, right? It's good to start practicing like, okay, hey, this is the problem that we're having. Let's talk about it. This is hard for both of us. And what can we do differently that's going to make life a little easier for both of us?
Yeah. I think that's so important in general also, but I find a lot of that comes around the sleep piece where mom is like the only one who is able to put baby to sleep. But part of that is because she has just been doing that all the time and not necessarily allowing for her partner to be part of the routine or part of, that whole process of bedtime or, soothing the baby back to sleep or any of that stuff. And so eventually it gets into that piece of like the partner's like, I don't actually know what to do because I haven't had a chance to practice. And then going back to that control, the mom's like, no, you have to do it like this. And I was like that with my first. With my second, I was like, just figure it out. Your turn. I think you learn, right? Like as a new mom, you're so like worried that if one thing changes, then your baby is not going to sleep, for example. I was very afraid when my first was a baby. And so I just was like, okay, well, this works. We have to always do it like this. But that rigid control is also not good for anyone. And so that's a big worry, I think, with families too, where then mom also goes back to work and she's like, oh my gosh, how's the daycare going to take care of the sleep? And you're like, they're going to figure it out. This is what they do. It will be fine. Yes, there will be a transition period. Yes, there will be some hiccups along the way. But part of that learning and part of that allowing for the learning is so huge. And so that's like the sleep piece, but this is like every area of life with children, it comes into play. The part that I think for us right now with my 6 and 8-year-old is the difficult part is the difference in parenting, like disciplining values, I guess. And there's a little bit of a disconnect there because I have had so much learning and training on attachment and connection and brain development. And my husband is very much stuck in, well, this is the way my dad and my parents and all the things. And you're like, but that's not the right way. But you can't necessarily say that's not the right way. In your mind, you're like, okay, but that's not the way things are anymore. Yeah. So it's a very interesting dynamic that we are kind of navigating now that my kids are starting to push the boundaries a little bit differently. So it never changes. And this is the thing, right? Open communication is so key. I will say the other thing for me personally in our relationship is my husband, and he's expressed this more lately, where he really feels like he was number one before kids and now is like number 0. Because my energy and attention is so enthralled in taking care of the kids and making sure that they're like developing properly and that their emotions are being validated and heard. And it's exhausting getting the lunches ready. Like all of that stuff is exhausting. And I remember, not so much anymore, but in those first 2 to 3 years, especially when I had two that were like basically 2.5 and younger. So not quite 2 under 2, but close. I was touched out and I was like, don't touch me. Like I have children hanging off of me at all hours of the day. And I just, please, I need my body to myself for like a moment. And so I feel like that's another big piece, which is like a whole other talk on this concept of being touched out also. But I think an important piece of this relationship part is finding ways to still reconnect with each other throughout the day. It doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be like that intimacy that we're thinking like, okay, let's go make out. It can literally be like a hug that's just a little bit longer. Or, in those early days, my like favorite thing was when he would like bring me, like go and fill my water bottle while I was nursing. Bring me water, right? Like those little things is what for me reminded me of like, okay, we're good.
Such a great point, and how that intimacy really can look very different at different stages of parenthood, at different stages of just life and circumstance, but how it is important. And again, it's so tricky because I feel like there's just so much, right? There's just so much. It's like, okay, one more thing. Now I have to make room for this and make room for that. And it can be as simple as just even acknowledging it, right? It's like sometimes we just don't even have the capacity to give anything else. And I think when that's the case, it's like just being open and acknowledging that without guilt, but with understanding, right? It's like, hey, I love you. And right now I have nothing to give. And I know that's going to change. And we're in this together. And this is what it is right now. So just that acknowledgement and that validation of what and acceptance of kind of circumstances. And then looking when you have capacity for those small ways like that you mentioned, right? Of like you know, again, like people talk about date nights. And again,
Mhm.
like date nights might look very, very different for, but
Yeah.
a date night could be just like putting out a charcuterie plate and watching a movie with baby, right? Just like being in the
Mhm.
same room with each other, not on your phones, or, it could be, like you said, like a 10-second hug. It could be a hug at all period, right?
Yeah.
If you're touched out, it could be just like sitting next to each other in
Mhm.
enjoying silence while the baby's napping for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So many things it could be just to connect in different ways.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, we used to do movie nights as like our date night, but sometimes also we'll plan a date night and one of us will be like, "I'm so sorry, I'm exhausted. I need to go to bed." And it's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, that's fine." So it's
Yeah.
just finding that flexibility and redefining what that looks like, what
Mhm.
your relationship looks like, what that, those date nights will look like. It's probably
Mhm.
not going to look like, oh, we're going out for dinner and drinks all the time.
Yeah.
Like maybe every now and
Yeah.
then you can get a sitter or you have some family that'll come and watch the baby or the toddler or the kids.
Mhm.
But finding little ways that you can still do that. Like we also used to do date days where once the
Mhm.
kids were in school or in daycare,
Mhm.
we would go and have lunch together somewhere, and that
Yeah.
feels super special.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
redefining what you consider, like, this reconnection and intimacy and dates and all of that kind of stuff. I think
Yeah.
that's such an
Yeah.
important piece to tie in along with that taking care of yourself piece, because I think we do get so caught up in taking care of baby, taking care of our children, that we forget to leave space for these other
Mhm.
pieces. And
Mhm.
sometimes that means that we have to drop the ball on one of the pieces. And maybe you don't go to that, I don't know, baby class that week, or, maybe the baby goes to your mom's house or something instead so that you can have like a date lunch with your husband or partner,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So I think that that's a piece of the puzzle too, is this, how do you, I hate the word balance, but how do you
Mhm.
find room
Yeah.
for these different areas? Because everything will be always out of balance. Like if you really
Mhm.
think about it, if you think about it as a piece of the pie, right? Taking care of the baby is going to take up most of the
Yeah.
pie. You'll have like one little sliver for yourself and maybe one little sliver for your couple kind of relationship. But I think it's an important piece to be aware of, because that's something that I remember in my motherhood journey at the first few years, we didn't really focus so much on it. And I sort of wish we had. I think we were
Mhm.
just so in the overwhelm and in the stress. So, yeah,
Yeah. But on the other hand, it's kind of like easy to say that with hindsight, right?
yeah,
Because it's like
yeah,
there's
yeah.
so many things I wish had been different, but then I'm like, okay, but if I were to go back, would
Would I
they
do
be?
it
Because
differently?
you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to think about for
Mhm.
sure. For sure. Even just having that awareness, I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah.
on your point about balance, like one thing I like to say about that is that this actually comes from a talk I did on work-life balance. It wasn't even really related to motherhood, although there were a lot of parents in the room, and that's often the balance, right? Parenthood versus work life, or family life versus work life. And I said, so often we think of work life balance or any kind of life balance as this destination, right? It's like, okay, I'm
Once I
striving
have
for
it,
this. And
life will be great.
exactly, exactly. It becomes one more thing that we're striving for. That we so much striving in Western culture, and it's just not that. It's not that. Life is dynamic, right? It's like this kind of ongoing day to day sort of balancing act, for lack of a better term, is right. So it's like to your point, it's like, okay, so today, what's the balance going to be? And it might be different tomorrow, and it might be different 6 months from now, and it might be different 6 years from now. And it's not like you're going to arrive at this mecca of,
Yeah,
of life balance. It's going to be just this ongoing sort of recognition
yeah.
that this is your pie, and piece pieces are going to look a little different every day, right?
And I
At every
think that's a
stage.
great point. I love that. I love that sort of view, that visual. But I think I also, it brings up the point that balance doesn't necessarily mean equal. Like it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that you have the equal time, for example, of work and life. or it sort of is more almost like a feeling, I think, of like, are you happy with how much time you are spending doing whatever, like working? Or are you happy with how much time you are spending as a couple? Or are you happy with how much time you are spending on your own for some, self-care? Because I think that we do fall into that trap of like, oh, everything has to be equal. That's how it's going to be in balance. But realistically, like spending the whole day by myself is not what I want. I mean, maybe I do want that like every now and then. But, like,
Yeah.
and so it's this balance of like, do I actually want to spend like 8 hours of my day all by myself, like just in silence, or do I actually just want like 1 hour of time in silence,
Right.
and then I will feel like I have that balance.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's that just kind of came into my head where I was like, oh, it's not so much about
Yeah.
the quality and like all the pieces have to be the same size to
Yeah.
be in balance.
And I would say, since we're talking about relationships, I would say the same thing is true about like division of responsibility within a partnership, right? It's like, it's not always going to be 50-50 balance. It's going to be finding what works
Mhm.
and what is most effective and efficient for your family unit. And it's going to look different, depending on a whole slew of circumstances. But it can be so tempting to be like 50-50 in all domains. And that's just really not realistic for a lot of
Mhm.
families.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and like for just as a personal example for our family, and I'm like very lucky and grateful about this, but my husband makes the meals, like he'll make dinner.
Mm,
And that's his job. And he takes out the
mm,
garbage and things like that. But like my job is and he still takes care of the kids. I'm not saying he doesn't take care of the kids, but my job is really in that taking care of the kids, making sure that they have the right clothes when they were little, making sure that they had all
mhm.
the diapers they needed and planning all of that, planning all of their, doctor's appointments and whatnot. And his thing is, I'm just going to make dinner every night. And then we share some of the other sort of daily household tasks. And so that worked for us because that making dinner piece and planning out the dinner and all of the things he loves
Mm,
and I hate.
mm,
And so it
mm.
really took a huge weight off of my shoulders. And
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
that worked.
Nice. Yeah, great example.
Okay, so I'm just conscious of time. So let's just end with if there was sort of one or two things that you find you're telling the moms that you work with over and over, or if there's like one or two sort of key takeaways that you really want moms to embrace, to remember, to kind of take to heart,
Mm.
what would that be?
Okay, I would actually say it always comes back to, and that is self-compassion, right?
Mhm.
It's like, because there's certain things that we can change, certain thought processes and certain practical things that we can change, but there's certain things we cannot. And even when we can, the process is not easy often. And so always coming back to that self-compassion piece. So some practical ways to kind of get started, because it's hard. It's really hard for a lot of people
Mhm.
to have that self-compassion. So a couple of practical strategies for that just to get started. I usually start one of two ways, depending on if the person's more like somatic or, in touch with bodily sensations versus kind of thought processes. So one is like when you catch yourself having that sort of negative self-talk, being really hard on yourself, trying to reframe in one of two ways, right? Either like, if I had a friend or a daughter or, someone I really deeply cared about in a similar situation, what are the words I would use and what
Mhm.
would I say to them? And sometimes it can be taking one step closer to home. It's like, if I were talking to my younger self, what
Mhm.
would I say to them? And there's just kind of like this tenderness that can evoke
Mhm.
talking to like a child, even if it's our own inner child. So that's one way of sort of just like, and even if it feels, because then they often say like, okay, yeah, that's them, but I wouldn't say that to myself. Even just recognizing that as a possibility, like just like we're re-networking the brain, right? So just like keep on with the exercise, even if you can't quite say that to yourself yet, recognizing that that is
Mhm.
a reasonable thing to say to someone in that situation, that there are other ways of interpreting the thing that you're feeling bad about. And then the second one, sometimes that just does not resonate. So then the second one is kind of going through the three main steps of self-compassion. So the first one is just recognizing that there is pain or struggle. So it could be something. So I often will go through and craft like a little 3-step motto. So the first step is like, okay, what is your kind of mantra going to be for when something is hard? Could be, this is hard. This is painful. This is a struggle. The second one is recognizing that you're not alone, that this is like a universal thing, and that there's this like interconnectedness of humanity. So it could be like, this is hard. There are so many other moms going through this right at this very moment. And then the third piece is some kind of act of kindness. So it could be that verbal act. It could be like, and you're doing your best. This is hard. So many other moms are going through this, and I'm doing my best. Or if you can't get yourself there yet, some kind of just like gentle touch, right? Just some sort of warmth, some sort, even just like closing your eyes for a minute and just enjoying like 5 seconds of silence, some small act of kindness to yourself. And that's where we start.
Yeah. Amazing. I love that. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, this was lovely. This was lovely to chat with you and to really just kind of get a little bit deep. I know that when you're working with clients, you probably get way deeper. I think there's a lot of value for moms to really work one-to-one with like a therapist in this regard. If they feel like this is like if you resonated with this, for example, it would be really helpful to kind of find someone to do a little bit more of that deeper work with. So tell us how people can find you, or if you have any other resources that they can like sign up for or whatnot, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. I always say like there's never a bad time for therapy, because for some people it could be like they have postpartum depression, like they have active symptoms in their life, and for other people it could be they're just navigating the transition, right? And just kind of need that support to get through. So if people wanted to find me, so I work in Ontario virtually at the moment. My website is Cedarwell Therapy. So like the cedar tree, cedarwelltherapy.com. I have an Instagram account. I'm not active at all there currently, but it is just at Mom Therapist. So that's maybe easier to remember, and then it can link to my website. But yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think that moms got a lot of benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Mothering from Within. If today's chat sparked something inside of you to explore your motherhood journey deeper, the Mothering from Within Collective is waiting with open arms. This program offers an intimate, high-touch coaching journey designed to empower you with the confidence and clarity to embrace motherhood on your terms, free from guilt. Get curious about your parenting values, gain clarity on your baby's sleep, development, and more, with comprehensive courses, one-to-one support, group Q&As, and a nurturing community. This is your invitation to join a community of mamas doing it all their own way, supported, seen, and held. Visit the link in the show notes to learn more about the collective and how we can walk this beautiful path together. Until next time, stay curious, embrace clarity, and let your courage shine.